This morning, I'm going to sort of refocus here and talk about some of those things that we've learned. What are some of the things that are happening out there? And how does architecture play a role? The reason Matt got up here and talked, Matt and I travel and do these things, and every time I sit down and hear Matt talk, new thoughts emerge in my mind, new things, new rededication to the purpose of why we're doing this. You know, why are we building buildings? You know, it's hopefully not for the honor and glory of some building committee or some pastor or some congregation, but these buildings are being built as tools to the honor and glory of Christ. Right? Christ He's our light. And these buildings have to be able to reflect that and be used as tools in order to reflect that to a community. And so that's why we're doing this. That's why we're in this. That's why we align ourselves with like-minded people who are builders, who can be treated as trusted advisors. I'll get into the intricacies of that relationship later on, but when you've got an architect and a contractor and an owner who get that right, who are willing to put the Lord in the center of that relationship, some amazing things can happen. You will have challenges, I guarantee you that. Budget, code, whatever, you know, they come along. That's just the nature of the beast here. But this can be a very profitable way to move forward, not monetarily, but profitable in terms of what it can do for a congregation to arm them with facilities and tools to move forward. So we're going to talk about some of those things this morning. We're going to talk about different ways to think about buildings, changing our perspective about buildings. That's an important component, getting out of the mindset that we get our building built because that's the church that we are. And so we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about developing vision. How do we develop vision? How does that happen? It doesn't happen with me. Churches all the time, you know, they say, you've had a lot of experience. You've designed over 800 plus ministry projects. Give us a vision. I don't know. You know, I don't know what your vision is. You tell me. And we'll talk about vision. We'll get down the road on that, but we'll talk about how to develop vision. Creating partnerships that matter. Partnerships are crucial. Relationship is crucial. So doing that in a way that really makes sense is important, and we're going to talk about collaboration and how collaboration can help too. So, okay, so let's spend a few minutes and talk about changing our perspectives about buildings. What we would say, moving from community or consumer-centered design to community-centered design. I mentioned that a few minutes ago that Craig, my previous partner, had done community centers. What's the difference between that? You know, it's funny. You look back at the way that buildings that were dedicated for certain ministerial reasons were built back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and so on and so forth. They were built iconically. They were built for that. By that statement, what I mean is that a building was built in a form and in a substance to look like a church, to be reflective of what that community felt like a church ought to look like. Right? So, I mean, you go to the southeast. A classic example is the gable building with the 4 columns. We actually presented in a family life center yesterday at a church that was exactly that building in Kentucky. You know, gable, 4 columns. You know what the younger fellows in my office call that? Phony colony. So to them, it's not authentic. It's not real. It's iconic, though. No mistaking that building for what it was. You drive by that building in Middletown, Kentucky, you drive by that building and boom, that's a church. I know a church when I see a church. Right? So, designed that way. Well, there's been a fleeing of iconic form by today's society for whatever reason. There's been a mistrust of that. So it's changed about those ways of thinking. More towards community-centered design, too. And community-centered design, the parallel is interesting. You know, I was born in *57. I grew up in the 60s, you know, starting to go to the YMCAs to play ball with my friends on Saturday afternoon. We had a YMCA down the road in Chicago where I was raised. And the YMCA was built in the way that churches were built back in those days, very institutional, very sequential. Churches were built sequentially because They would need a place to worship, then they would add a narthex, then they would maybe tack on a couple of bathrooms so they didn't have to go to the outhouse, and then they would go tack on a children's wing or an adult education wing or a family life center or an administration area or this, that, and the other thing. And pretty soon you had these buildings, as they would acquire property and add on, they had these buildings that were maze-like buildings. You would go into these buildings and the usher would greet you and shake your hand and tell you where to hang up your coat and hand you a bulletin and then hand you a guide map and tell you, good luck to you. We may never see you again. You're going to need to drop your kids off over here on the guide map. If you get lost, just go out the door and walk around the building and come to the front because you're never going to find your way back through the building again. That's the way buildings were built, and it didn't matter 40 years ago because people didn't make decisions about where to go to church based on these external issues of spatial organization or functional layout. They made decisions on where to go to church based on what? Where they were raised. I was raised in this church, I moved to this town, I'm going to that church. Denominational decisions made that easy. Well, churches have changed. People think differently. Everybody's become a shopper. Everybody thinks differently, right? There's criteria now that people have. Who could have predicted that safety for children was going to be an issue? You know, when my kids were being raised from '83 to whenever they left home, actually one's still in the house. But when my kids were raised, you know, they would get out of the car and just disappear. They knew where their friends were, they knew where their class was, boom, gone. Nowadays, parents don't do that. They clutch their kids, they hold their kids, they bring their kids to a check-in point. They make sure that the criteria that the people that are responsible for their kids need to hear are heard loudly and clearly so that there's no mistaking what my goals are for my kids. People think differently about that kind of thing. So the way that we navigate buildings is different. The way that parents and kids move through buildings, the way that we circulate, the way that we relate to spaces differently. It's all very different. So this whole notion of community-centered design has transitioned from the old YMCA's of the past where you would go into a building and you would pay your money and then you would go down the hall and you would find the tag that said men's locker room and you go in the locker room and then you weave your way through the locker room and then you find the gym or you find the pool buried back in the bowels of the building, right? That's the way the old Ys were. Well, modern community centers are not built that way at all. Modern community centers, lots of glass, not institutional, open, inviting, perceivable. You can see inside the building, right? Our churches of the past, you can't see inside the churches of the past. They're closed off. They're fortress-like. We do a lot of these buildings, by the way, a lot of transition buildings. We're working on one in Boulder, Colorado right now that is right in the heart of downtown Boulder. That land must be worth $25 million that they're sitting on. And they had a decision process. Do we abandon this land and abandon this building and sell the land and go out and build what we need on a beautiful piece of land in the suburbs, or do we stay here? Their vision is surprise Boulder. Surprise Boulder with what? Surprise Boulder with the gospel. We're staying here. We've been here for 100 years. We're not leaving. But we got a fortress. Help us transition the fortress into something that is open. Take us from the YMCA to the community center of the modern day, which is clear entry, lots of glass, color. It's okay to use color in church. Color, by the way, is one of those things that really helps define a sense of relevancy. And color is free. It's free. I can't wait to go to heaven. I hear there's really cool things that he's done with color. I mean, not in the way that we think about color, you know? So, color is one of those things we can utilize as a tool. And so, it's important for us to think about the way that space is organized. When you go into a modern community center, everything is there. Pool, gym, concession stand, climbing wall. Boom, everything is right there. Glass, everything is visible. Everything, you can see fun happening. You can see exercise happening. You can see the people in the weight room. That's different than the YMCA, sequentially designed. Church, sequentially designed. So, difference. That's a different way of thinking. Matt used the example of the woman at the well, because the well was the community center, right? It was where people gathered in the center of the community. It's what they needed to do every single day. I learned that in 1988 when I first opened my office. I got a contract to do inspections to prepare all the USPS facilities in the western United States for the changing ADA codes that would come along in a year or two. So I got to go out and inspect post offices in places like Troy, Montana, and what were some of the towns in Wyoming? I don't even remember. Sheepskin, Wyoming. I mean, it was just these little communities that were nothing communities, but they all had a post office. And I learned pretty quickly that at 10 o'clock, when the postmaster, or 11 o'clock, whenever the postmaster got around to it, would put the mail in the slot, the town showed up. And the town showed up at that time not just to go retrieve their mail, the town showed up to connect with one another. They knew that if they showed up at 10 o'clock, they were going to see so-and-so and so-and-so, and catch up on this and catch up on that. It was the town hub. It was the well. Well, how do we think about our churches as that integral to our communities? How do we think about that? Is our building prepared to be able to become a place where people come to? I learned this in Chula Vista, California. This is one of those learning experiences that we had. We're doing the second phase of their project right now, where we did the first phase 11 years ago. It took them 4 years to go through the process of getting their building built in California. And the majority of that is negotiating the community betterments that you have to give to the city in order to get them to approve your project. Everything is done under conditional use. And in order to get their project approved, they had to go build hiking paths across town on their nickel to be able to get it. So it's just an extortion process that California has figured out. So it took them 4 years to get it done. They got it done, and right off the bat they started getting requests for, can we have our yoga exercise class here? Can we have our cheer class? Can we have our taekwondo class? Can we do this? Can we do that? And their answer was, no, we're not really set up to do that. We can't really, we have our staff here, and we don't really have volunteers to lock and unlock the building at night. We really can't do that. But there was obviously a need. So that summer, after they opened up in the fall, that next summer, they had a couple of interns coming in. The intern's job was, you connect with the people that need the space, and you control the keys and lock it up and replenish the paper towels. And so these interns did that, and within a year, they had 1,200 people a week coming into their building that were not members of their church. They weren't connecting, though. It's really nice to create people flow. We're going to talk about creating people flow. They were not connecting. So a couple of the older folks in the church became hip to this, and they started a parenting class on Saturday mornings. They started passing flyers out about coming to a free parenting class. Well, these moms that were coming in for these yoga exercise classes, trying to get their bodies in shape after having small children, after having babies, they were taking them up on it, and they started coming to these classes and forming a relationship to the older people. It's why I stuck in the church that I am in now for 40 plus years, is because of Eunice Bellamy and Dorothy Ernst in 1977, when I followed a girl into church after she dumped me. Eunice and Dorothy, in their 70s, started feeding us college students pork chops. Come over after church and have pork chop dinners with us. We were college students. We were eating hot dogs and ragu for dinner all week. And they were feeding us mashed potatoes, not instant mashed potatoes. They had instant mashed potatoes in 1977. Corn, not canned corn. Corn, gravy. This was like real home cooking. And Dorothy and Eunice figured out, they didn't have much to say to us. We're so glad to have young people in the church. Stuff that was really gracious and cool to hear, but they were just feeding us good food. Like these older people at this church in Chula Vista, they were just being gracious to people coming in and saying, let us tell you about our experiences raising our kids. And boom, the young marriage class takes off in this church. They had become a de facto community center, right? They figured out how to connect to community after the people flow started to happen. People are coming in. You're not going to go out and knock on doors in America anymore and hand them a tract and get them to come to your church. I did that in Cuba in 2004. People were hungrily receiving the information you could give them. Tract ministries alive and well in Cuba. That doesn't work in the United States. People we're savvy to that. They're guarded. So how do you do it? You establish a relationship. Bring them into your building. Figure out what kind of facility can we create, what kind of need can we create to answer. How can we become that well? What kind of story does your building tell? It's going to tell a story. It's going to communicate something, positive or negative or mediocre or whatever it is, to the surrounding community. Is it a building that people, as Matt was saying earlier, drive by and go, hey, there's something going on in there. What is going on in there? I can see something happening in that building. Right? Important to think about how that happens. Does your building communicate that you want to be part of the community, or is it oppositional to that form of thinking? Are you in a facility that is closed and guarded and walled off? Again, load-bearing walls, punched openings, shutters, big, gigantic doors. The classic church, classic definition of church. Or does it communicate something to them? Well, a lot of this starts with this whole discussion of mission, and how do we get to mission? How does that happen? Mission is hopefully derived from thoughtful prayer. I guess the word today is mindful. Mindful. I mock that word sometimes, but I really think that being thoughtful and intentional about praying for mission is very important, in doing it in a group, doing it with people, because mission doesn't always come from just one person. It comes from a lot of people. How do we do that? How do we identify the greatest needs in the community? People will say, you worked all over the United States, tell us what the needs are around here. I have no idea. I was down in South Florida, and they were saying, we've got X amount of money sitting in the bank here. We want to go out and plant the campus out in Immokalee, Florida. We want to do a child care center out there and make it our initial implant in the community. Well, it turns out they didn't need a child care center out there. There's no kids out there. Well, there's a lot of older folks, or immigrants that were coming in. There were needs that were related to some of the Haitian immigrants that were coming in, but there wasn't child care. So, what are the needs? How do we get to finding out what the needs are? For a number of years, for 9 years, I chaired an organization called Assist in Salt Lake City. And Assist had a outreach to the communities using community development block grants derived from the federal government administered through the cities. And in order for the cities to get CBDG money from the federal government, and it was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars every year that they would get, we would use that money to put up emergency ramps for people who were below the poverty line, widen doors, put grab bars in to make buildings accessible so that residents could stay in their buildings for as long as possible while they were either going through a healing situation or whether they had aged or whatever it was. Well, in order to do that, the communities had to put together assessment forms that are used by the federal government to do that. They have those. You can go to those cities and become familiar with what the results of those assessments say. Go and ask them for those. Ask them, how do you guys, the studies that you guys do for the federal government to get CBDG monies, can we have copies of those and read those? They will tell you what their biggest needs are. Find those things out. That's beginning points for understanding who your community really is, not who you think they are. Everybody wants to start a food kitchen. In a lot of communities today, food is a done deal. They don't need to worry about food. It's been taken care of. Last year, I remember organizations in Utah handing turkeys out to anybody that would take them because they were going to all go bad because there weren't enough families that needed turkeys. That's not where the needs were. The needs were in other areas. There were needs in our communities, whether they be opioid related or whether they be related to the education system being swamped and overwhelmed or abuse situations, whatever it is. Find out what those needs are and figure out how to connect with that. Developing a vision for the future. What are some of the ways that we can begin to think about creating people flow? The two top ones on this list of child care and senior care ministry organizations are automatically given a hall pass on this. They automatically trust you on this. A lot of churches have done child care, and they will say, we are never doing child care again. We are never doing pre-K again. Because they've done it the wrong way. They've done pre-K in a way that is not the way that a business model would follow to get at competent profitable, financially stable childcare. They do a pretty good job on the ministry side in some regards, although my kids went to a pre-K at a church 2 blocks from where we lived in Salt Lake City. We were a one-car family back in the 80s. For 9 years my kids went to that school as they progressed through in ages, and not one single time did that church ever connect to us to ask us to come to a church-related event. They were nice people. They did a competent job of caring for our children and teaching our kids some things and allowing my wife to have a break. But at the end of the day, there was no cross-connection. There was no intentionality behind that. So they failed in 2 regards. They were failing financially. I learned that later on because I did an addition to their building as an architect, and I realized what a millstone this pre-K center was for this church financially. And they didn't form connection to the neighborhood. Why are you doing this? Because in their mind, they thought, well, this is what ministry groups do, is we do this. Yeah, but you're not doing it for any reason other than you think you should be doing it. So there's ways of doing this. We're going to talk about this morning. Connection points through the performing arts. I can sit up here and tell you stories about organizations that have done an excellent job with performing arts and connecting to community through that. Community event spaces. The Hub 801 that you saw, Mass Church operated a community event space that was a money resource to help them through the early stages of affording that mortgage that they had on that building. Athletics and fitness, shared workspace. I'll show you some examples of that kind of stuff. Make sure that when you do this, though, that you're following the guidelines of a good master plan. That's where we get ourselves into trouble in a lot of projects, is the master plan consisted of whomever was in charge of the trustee board at the time going out and buying a piece of land and tacking on the next addition. Oh, we need this? Okay, let's go buy so-and-so's house back here and tear the house down and build this, or convert the house to that, or build around the house. That was the master plan, is that as needs would present themselves, we would go out and find land adjacent to our building and just tack on another addition. And you had these, again, these maze-like buildings, sequential buildings. Master planning is important, and it is important, if not to you, it'll be important for your community. Be careful with a master plan and your community. Communities will try to box you in on decisions that you have no idea about 20 years from now. Be careful. Don't sign agreements on master plans that don't allow you some flexibility on your master plan. Make sure that you have things written in on your master plan when you sign these SPA agreements, these special provision agreements and so forth, that allow you some flexibility. So if things change, you can reorganize the way that you do this. It's important to think about flexibility in a master plan. Think about phasing, too. I can't tell you how many times, I get the financial analysis back from the organization that we work with to do financial research before we go out and do a design charrette, which I'll talk about in a minute. And I find out that their needs are X, but their budget is 1/3 of X. We're going to phase portions of this project. Let's start talking about prioritization. How do we do this? And how do we do it in such a way that if we're going to phase it, that when the next phase comes along, we don't stymie your organization by the intrusion of a construction project right in the heart of what you're trying to get done. So thinking logically about how is the way that we add on going to affect the functional layout of space is going to be important. It's just good stewardship, by the way. This is a project that we're involved in. You're going to hear from Bill Shalkowski this morning. Bill is with the Solomon Foundation. He's behind this project. This is a project that is done in Escondido. It's New Vintage Church. They're connecting into arts organizations. They're resurrecting an old 600-seat theater, tacking on about 20,000 square feet next to this, and using the arts as an entry point into their community. So 6 days a week they're going to be having arts events here, arts training, arts presentations, arts, visual arts, so on and so forth, performing arts in this building. But they are a church that happens to have a building that's dedicated to the arts. And the arts, by the way, are one of those communities that don't oftentimes get a chance to hear the gospel. They become alienated to the gospel. Artists and art people coming from that culture are oftentimes living on a different planet. I am one of those people, by the way. New Vintage Church, Grand Theater, that's what they're going to call it. Brookhaven Church, this is a church that was dead in the water until they employed an organization that we're affiliated with to come in and run and manage their pre-K center. So we opened a pre-K center. It's a pre-K center that will eventually take on 260 kids. They've been open for 13 months. The total project was $7.2 million. The entire mortgage on the project, they had $2 million in cash, so they had a $5+ million mortgage. The entire mortgage is covered by the proceeds from the pre-K. Okay? That's a big deal. That's what enabled this project to get built. And in that period of time, they've been in for 13 months, they've doubled the size of their congregation. And they are connecting, they're not managing the pre-K center, it's being managed by an outside organization that does this for a living. I mean, it's their goal in life is to manage pre-K centers. They split the profits. There's a 60-40 split of some sort in this deal. And they manage it in a proper way. The church still scholarships some of the parents that have needs for pre-K. They scholarship them out of the proceeds that come in from this. But this is a legit pre-K center. And by the way, it's top drawer kid space, which has been one of the strong attractors for young families in McKinney, Texas to this church, because they have the best of the best when it comes to the kinds of space that they have for their kids. So terrific space and really serving the needs of the community. And now the church has taken off because they were intentional about forming a relationship to the flow of people that would come into that building, that do come into that building every day. Just last month, I heard Nelson Eagle, who's one of the managers of this organization, said that last month they turned a check for the month of September for $50,000 to the church. And that was the plan, $55,000 a month. So they're within $5,000 of their target in 1 year. Hub 757 has done the same thing. We're now working on the second phase of their pre-K. Their 220 student pre-K was so successful, we're building a duplicate across the street. They also operate a 1,000-seat performing arts center that is used as their church. So these are organizations that are inviting the community to come in and then intentionally thinking about how do we get in their path on the flow of people that come in, how do we do that? It's Believers Church in Suffolk, Virginia, down in Hampton Roads. And it's great space. It's good space. Everybody wins in this deal. So, other examples, the Salt Mine Project. This is a project for Christian businessmen out of Atlanta, came into Salt Lake City. We are the place that everybody wants to come plant a church because of the LDS culture. They came in, and what they did instead of planting a church is they opened a for-profit 19,000 square foot shared workspace. It has a room about this size that seats about 180 people for training events. It has become a home to plant 2 churches. That was their intention, was to create space that could be double used. Church planting space, and then the other 165 hours a week is used for shared workspace. And now the people from the church are renting space, the staff from the churches are renting space during the midweek to integrate into the path of people who are there for work. So they're forming intentional relationship to the community through that and inviting them into church on Sunday. And it's a cool space. That's the great thing, is you get that kind of thing. This is the church I was talking about, Boulder, Colorado, that has decided we want to open our building up. We want to get away from the fortress mentality. They've got an annex building across the street that's going to have affordable housing. It's going to have a training level for a bakery, and they're exploring now a zero-proof bar. Have you heard of zero-proof bars? So no alcohol bar environments. I'm telling you, in Boulder, Colorado, this is going to be a hit, because they're very health conscious in Boulder, Colorado. Everybody's got an exercise bike strapped onto their back for whatever they're doing. Everybody's that way. And so zero-proof bars, which have taken off in all places, New York City, are now being brought into this situation. And they're using it as training ground for people coming out of homeless situations and so forth. Retail can be incorporated in. Matt will talk a little bit about retail. This is a retail hotel project built onto the property next to First Baptist Church, a leadership training center in Denver, Colorado, that's also used as a church on Sunday mornings. So what you're seeing is the trend here of coupling all these kinds of dual purpose type spaces that can be used to form intrusion into community in an intentional way. Okay? That's how architecture can assist that. Collaboration, we talked about, I've used this word a couple times this morning, doing design by charrette. Has anybody ever participated in a charrette, formal charrette? Okay, so charrette is the French word for little chariot. And they used to roll this little cart through the Beaux-Arts School of Design in Paris, France in the 1700s, and if your drawings weren't on the cart, you received a failing grade. So for architects, it's a big deal to get your drawings done. We do that over a 3-day time period. We invite the church in. There's ways of setting this up in the proper way. Don't just invite the people that can afford to fund the project, or the old guys on the leaders board, or the ministry leaders in the children's ministry. Invite some younger people into this. Get a mixed group of people. Get some different perspectives. Gain access to their opinions. They will respectfully share their opinions, and it's important to have intergenerational discussions in a lot of different settings like this. So getting the invitations right. Our process happens over a 3-day time period. There is a homework stage that goes on ahead of the charrette. I'm doing one next week in Indiana. I spent some time early this morning working on a few things in preparation for that. We're setting it up properly to understand their existing buildings, to understand their properties, to understand what the city regulations are going to be. All that homework is done ahead of time. There's a financial survey that's done that puts together a report, so I understand, where's the limits for this project. Really important to understand. Good architecture happens after we establish where the boundaries really are, and financial is one of those boundaries. So understanding that is going to be very important. We spend the first day talking about needs and vision, and I've got some clue. I've got a call set up with the one I'm doing next week, tomorrow, to go over some of this stuff. I'm looking for things that I think I know, but I'm also looking for things that I definitely don't know. And then we're going to get involved in the discussion at night. That first night is getting everybody on the same page. It's making sure that when I leave that night and I go through that 2 hours of stark raving panic on design, that I've got a clear idea of what our goals are as a group. I want to make sure that I understand how many seats are we doing, or what's the size and scale of the space, what's our first phase look like, so on and so forth. I may use some diagrams like this to get the adjacencies right, whether it's existing space or new space. But that first night is not really about presenting, it's about asking. That second night, though, we'll come in with more defined floor plans, master plan concept ideas, basically to pin up and talk about. And then by the time we get to day 3, we're talking about a much more revised form of things after we get the input of people. Day 2 is an exciting time. It's a momentum building time. People really get involved in that. I mean, it's just a great time to do that. And we're showing them pictures of the way the building will look. We're designing in 3D, so we're able to do that. All of which is subject to change. Architects, like anybody else, they don't like change. I designed something, this is my creation, why are you telling me that you don't like this? Right? Architects in that situation, after they've gone off to their own studios for 3 weeks and they come back and they've invested so much time and energy and thought into the project, and they put it up there on a screen or they put it up there on the boards, and somebody says, yeah, I really like that, and that works out really well, but that's one of the ugliest buildings I've ever seen in my life. You know what my job is? How to discredit you. Let me tell you how much you don't understand about architecture. They may do it more subtly, but there's a defensiveness that gets set up. Well, the charrette disarms everybody from that. We're here working together to do this. And a lot of times I like to present up on a whiteboard so people can come up and draw over the top of the design and talk about things that they've seen, or talk about things that work better for them, so that we do understand and we can change and morph the design as it moves along. So it's not just here, take it, here it is, I've concocted the most wonderful thing. It's a different way of designing. Terrifying, but a different way. So finally we get to that process, and eventually we can do more photorealistic renderings, or fly-throughs, or fly-arounds, or however we want to do that. Nowadays with computers, computers have assisted us so much where we don't have to disappear into the office for weeks at a time and come back. We can come back and have things ready, or do things on the fly as we're talking. So some great things can happen with the assistance of some of the tools that we have now. But it's a really great way to get the people around the table and really transition from the ownership of the design from the architect to the body of people that will be employing this and funding this and moving this forward, so that they feel like this is ours and I can explain it. I can take it to the other people in the congregation and show them this. So anyway, those are the kinds of things that happen. We're going to spend a little bit of time in our breakout session talking about the process, more about the process. Some things that I just touched on, scratched the surface on a little bit here a few minutes ago, that are going to be important for us to convey. The next session that we're going to take together, Matt's going to come back up and lead a session on how to form these strategic relationships with individuals and how to get off the dime. What are the first steps? What do we do? how do we move this forward, and talk about the story call that has been established in order to sort of get that initial step moving forward for you. Sometimes the answer to these things too, by the way, whether they be some of the ideas that you've seen up here, the answer is no, not now. Sometimes people will say, hey, we've got to get this building built. I've had pastors say, we've got to get this building project up and going because I'm having all kinds of trouble with my congregation here. I need a project to rally around. Bad idea. Don't put me in the middle of that. You know, I worked as a student for a couple of my professors, and 3 of the first 5 houses that I designed divorced before we opened the doors of the house. Why? Because they had bad marriages going in. It wasn't that the house project did it. The house project just caused the bad marriage to emerge. It was a bad marriage going in, and they thought that they were going to save the marriage by a house project. Well, churches do the same thing. We just need to do this because that's the root of all our problems. We don't have shared adversity. Don't do that. Go for a hike. You know, go up and climb a mountain together or something, but don't build a building. Right? So we're gonna talk a little bit about, you know, positioning yourself properly to be able to do a project in a way that makes sense, or not do a project. So if the answer is no, hear that. Understand, no, not now, or no, not ever, or ever is a long time. But sometimes the answer is not a building. Sometimes the answer is simpler. Sometimes, you know, people want to abandon an area when a simple conversion can be done to a space. We want to help you through that.